Hello, my fellow. Today I'm going to talk about gate. Is that a nice looking gate or what? Yeah. If you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. I'm going to talk about gate stuff, which is weird stuff. And gate stuff is not really about gate stuff. Not fully. The weird thing about gate stuff is that there's a group of people who share a list of traits and experiences, a long list of traits and experiences. And one of the things on that list is gait. And now this is really weird because um, it's a long list of shared experiences. And you could say, well, it's cold reading. What you're talking about, it's kind of like cold reading. But I know what cold reading is. Cold reading is making vague statements that apply to everyone, but they to the person you're saying it to, it seems like it's specific. It's not cold reading. This list is really, really specific, and that's why it's so weird. So, the weirdness needs to be explained, and I'm going to present an argument, a possible explanation for the weird stuff. And so, I should clarify that one of the things on this list is gait. Okay. And a lot of people have hypothesized that this one thing on the list has somehow managed or manufactured everything else on the list. Whew. And if that's the case, then whoever's running this program is really autistic or something. But it's a very long and specific list, and not everyone, you know, follows the list 100%. But it's weird nonetheless. So basically, my argument is that it's not that this one thing on the list has managed or manufactured everything else on the list, but this one thing on the list, like everything else on the list, is caused by synchronicity. It's due to synchronicity. And so that's my argument in a nutshell. Synchronicity. And people have made that argument before. But you know, a lot of people use the word synchronicity and don't necessarily know what it means. They don't know all the ins and outs. There's ins and then there's outs. and when you explain something using a word that you don't really know, that it's not really an explanation, um, you're just substituting a word for an explanation. So I'm basically going to spend the rest of the time just explaining in my own words, to the best of my current knowledge, what synchronicity is, and whether or not this argument is explains everything. It is good to know this stuff, especially in the context of gait, because not everything surrounding gait is weird. It's a lot of the stuff surrounding gait is actually expected and common, and not shocking if you know what I'm about to explain. So this argument having to do with synchronicity, it's not something I made up. It's an old argument. It's been around for a long time. It's an argument that's been used to explain a lot of different things. And I think the term synchronicity comes from Carl Jung. And actually, this argument having to do with synchronicity is an argument that's used to explain UFO stuff. And this is an argument that's repeated in UFO circles. And actually, Carl Jung wrote a book or a long essay just explaining what I'm about to explain to you, in his words. And you can read that book if you want. I think you can get a cheaper copy off of eBay. It's called Flying Saucers by Carl Jung. Yeah, so first of all, the thing that I think a lot of people don't really understand Carl Jung. Carl Jung himself didn't really have unique ideas. One way you could look at Carl Jung is basically all he did was take the status quo of the era, the ontological or religious status quo of the era, which was also the status quo of science in that day, and he just took ideas from that and changed the words, and to make the words like scientific, and that really is what science was in that day, in the early 20th century. People today talk about, oh, there's like this separation between religion and science. Well, not really. That's kind of new, but the ontological foundation of the West is monism, or more specifically, a philosophy known as Neoplatonism. And all the major religions are Neoplatonic, and Christianity too. And in addition, science had the ontological foundation of Neoplatonism. So basically, all Carl Jung is taking Neoplatonic ideas and changing words. That's one way to look at Carl Jung. So, for example, the word archetype, Neoplatonists call that angels. Same exact concept. He didn't come up with any of it. Okay? So this is not like new stuff. It doesn't begin with Carl Jung. And actually, the idea that a Western government is like doing occult stuff, is like running occult style programs, or programs having to do with remote viewing like Project Stargate, or programs having to do with intelligence or psychic stuff. That's all normal in the context of Western governments. There's a long history of Western governments doing magical programs. And the foundation of those magical programs are Neoplatonism. And that's basic knowledge that I think people should have. And today it's not very many people have that understanding, because we're in what's called the postmodern era. So, synchronicity is a Neoplatonic idea having to do with what's called the collective consciousness, or as Jung reworded it, collective unconscious. Okay. And it also has to do with the term reincarnation. And I've made a video about reincarnation in the past. But to quickly summarize, reincarnation is not what you think it is. Reincarnation, as it is taught by Neoplatonic religions, such as Buddhism, is not what we've been taught in the postmodern era. When I say the word reincarnation, what you imagine is a ghost exiting someone's body, traveling through the air, and entering someone else's body. And that's why I don't like using the word reincarnation, because that's what people imagine. But that's not really what reincarnation is. Reincarnation is really synchronicity, which is actually effects of the collective consciousness. And it really has to do with the what is believed to be the mechanism of the mechanisms of the collective consciousness. And okay, to quickly summarize the concept of the collective consciousness, you have Bob over here, he's thinking one thing, and Steve over here, he's thinking another thing. And one day, Bob and Steve, at the same time, think the same thought. And actually, due to some weird mechanism, there is a higher mind, a higher level of consciousness that is the amalgamation between Bob's mind and Steve's mind. And because Bob and Steve are thinking the same thing at the same time, this higher mind is also thinking that thought. And it probably has its own self-awareness, and it probably calls himself Joe. So Joe, at this point in time, is thinking that. And one way to look at that is that Bob and Steve are causing Joe to think a certain thought. But it's happening at the same time, so someone else could say, well, actually, Joe is causing Bob and Steve to think the same thought. But actually, it's more like it's not causal. It's one doesn't really cause the other. They happen at the same time. And it's because this system is self-similar and hierarchical, because you could think of it as a holographic illusion caused by stereographic projection of the implicate order. And that is the cause of all things and forces and the distinction between things. And such a mechanism requires the existence of something like remote viewing. So, of course, a program such as Gate is obviously related to another program called Stargate. And you don't have to even say, oh, the word gate is in both. You don't even need that. They're obviously related. Obviously. And that's not shocking. That shouldn't be shocking at all. It's expected. Especially if you understand that the fundamental ontology of the West has always been Neoplatonism. And it's just kind of complicated these days, because the masses, you could say, the masses are taught something different than Neoplatonism, which is probably closer to something like Gnosticism. But figure that out. Okay, that's a mystery in and of itself. But the whole, these magical programs done by Western governments, that's not shocking at all, and it's really easy to understand that stuff. So synchronicity, really, what you're talking about is, you could think of it as fate. It's kind of like a script that's pre-written. I'm not necessarily saying that like the future is set in stone. It's not. The thing is that time doesn't really work like, oh, that's going to happen in the future. So to say that the future is set in stone is not itself an accurate statement. Synchronicity, like it's like reincarnation. Reincarnation is it's something that's going to happen. It's a nature variable. It's not a nurture variable. Actions that people have taken, the way that you were raised, did not lead to this list of characteristics, these list of experiences being shared among people. It's not due to a nurture variable. It's due to a nature variable. A common nature variable that people are aware of is genetics, heritability. Your parents act a certain way, so you act a certain way. Or your parents are smart, so you're smart. But not everything, not everything is heritable. Not everything is explained by just genetics, just heritability. Not everything is explained by, oh, you're a part of this culture. Some things are only explained by this concept of synchronicity, which is due to the collective consciousness, which is based in the ontological perspective of monism. So, personality. Some personalities, like for example, I'm an INTP, and the way that I have acted in my life has been kind of weird compared to everyone else. And people my whole life had said to me, Eric, you're kind of weird. And so it's almost like my personality exists in spite of my culture. Also, in spite of my parents too, and my siblings. My siblings and my parents don't act like me at all. One thing that could and even the word INTP, that comes from Carl Jung. That's Jungian typology, and his explanation of the personality types is synchronicity. So a big shocker there. So yeah, personality in the Jungian terms is explained by synchronicity, or the collective consciousness. And another way to say that, using common language, is that the collective consciousness directed your personality because that's the way it is. because of like statistics or something. There's bottom up influences and top down influences. Like I explained, it's not really causal in that sense. It wouldn't be causal. And I don't know for sure if this stuff is true, but it is necessarily true if monism is true. And I can really only make an argument for monism, and I therefore I take the position of monism. And I definitely want to engage in a dialogue regarding ontology. Ontology, that's not really something people have talked about, especially in the postmodern era. Like, for example, Descartes, way back in the 1700s, came up with this idea that, ghost, it was called substance dualism. He had this crazy idea that, your mind was a ghost that could exit your body and go somewhere else. And then Baruch Spinoza came back with substance monism. And everyone was like, oh, okay, it's monism. And we haven't really had that kind of a discussion about ontology until really today, which is we're reaching the climax of the postmodern era. Yeah, I mean, even the word psychology, the root word psyche is a Greek word, which is the translation of the Hebrew words for spirit in the Bible. And the Bible is a Neoplatonic text, and you could really see the Bible as just an early form of psychology. And nowhere in the Bible does it even in any way talk about some kind of a substance that leaves your body and travels somewhere else. No. The Bible and Christianity is Neoplatonism, 100%. Yeah, so yeah, definitely, obviously there's weird occult government programs that are rooted in Neoplatonism. Obviously, that's obvious. It's not even but to say that they have the ability to manage or manufacture all this stuff, and people, the bits and pieces that people remember of the program, really, if you think about it, just kind of falls under just like certain testing of abilities such as IQ and psychic abilities. Just a bunch of different kind of tests, really. And yeah, it's kind of weird to erase kids' memories, and it's kind of weird to do that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the program is nefarious or that they're following your every move and purposefully ruining your life. Obviously, yes, they are keeping track of you because it's the government. Okay, that's obvious. Okay, that's you'd be crazy to suggest that they're not. Okay, but the government is keeping track of everyone. And obviously, if you're a kid and in a special program, then that's in your file, and maybe there's certain things connected with your file. All right, you know, I don't know how it works, but you know, it's government, and the government. What the thing about the government is that the government is inept unless you're talking about them keeping power. Then they're really good at what they do. But pretty much everything else is kind of half-assed, and you know, so it's and that's what centralized you know, for power. That's what centralized power does. It results in a lot of inept stuff. A lot of useless stuff that no one really cares about. That doesn't really affect anything. um, and no, I am not connected with the government in any way, nor are any of my family members, and I don't have any friends that are connected with the government or military in any way. And I plan on never being affiliated with the government or military. Okay, and that's just. I'm going to talk a lot more about this subject in the future and related subjects, so long for now. Thanks for watching. Please comment